Hello, today we are rewiring my 1989 Washburn Les Paul Custom. We're going to install a pre-wired harness from Home of Tone. For this particular guitar, it requires mini pots. You'll see in a second the potentiometers that are currently in it are really close to the edges of the cavity. A regular pot won't fit in there without carving out the cavity further, and I really don't want to do that. So James from Home of Tone, he made me one of his signature Les Paul wiring kits, but he made it with CTS mini pots. So I'm told they're CTS quality, but just in a mini pot size, so there's zero compromise, which should be really handy. We're also putting on this pure tone jack. As you can see, it's got two lugs on the bottom. It's wired in mono, but the two lugs mean that the cable stays in a bit tighter. I just want to say that this isn't a how-to video. It's not how to rewire your guitar, and it's definitely not how to solder. If you're looking for one of those videos, I suggest you look elsewhere or ask for help from your local guitar tech. I'm taking a picture of the wiring as it's currently wired up. I'm going to write down the colors of the wires that are connected to either volume pot. I'm then going to cross-reference those against the wires on the switch and coming from the pickups. I definitely recommend doing this. It's a good way just to not get too confused with a load of wires floating around the cavity as you're trying to work. I would recommend keeping a wiring diagram on hand. I did, and I also was reading the instructions from Home of Tone on how to rewire a Les Paul. The instructions I was using suggested rewiring the switch first. At this point I was planning on reusing the switch, so I tried to rewire the output jack first. Firstly, we obviously need to remove the existing components, so I started by removing the output jack. I brought out this helping hand tool to hold the pots as I was trying to desolder the wires. It just gave me more room to see what I was actually doing. I began by desoldering the wire coming from the bridge going to both tone pots. Once that was done, I then desoldered the pickups and the switch off of the volume pots accordingly. Now that we've got the old wiring removed, we can see how close the potholes are to the edges of the cavity. A normal pot won't fit in that, so we had to go with the mini pots. Here is the original switch that we were trying to reuse. We'll come to that in a little bit. So now I'm about to mock up the new wiring kit going in. I just want to stretch out the wires a little bit to fit. I'm assuming that this cavity isn't shaped the same way as a Gibson, nor are the potholes in the same place, so I wanted to just kind of adjust the pots in place a little bit, get them sitting properly. Now, this was the first problem I ran into. The original pots were, I guess you would call them import brand or affordable, whatever you want to call them. You have to remember this guitar was assembled in Japan in the late 80s. So the pots weren't what's known now as USA spec. That's what CTS are. CTS pots require a larger diameter hole than the pots that were in the guitar originally. That requires us to bore out the hole on the guitar. I didn't have the correct drill bit at hand, so I ended up waiting a couple of days for that to come in the post. In the meantime, I had posted to Instagram about my first roadblock in this replacement of wiring. A friend of mine, Matt, he is a guitar tech and a guitarist. He suggested that when I do go to bore out the holes in the guitar, to run the drill backwards. That is, to run it anti-clockwise. His reasoning behind that was because if it runs forward and it's starting to cut the hole as opposed to just ream the hole out, there's a possibility that it could chip not only the paint but also the wood. So, as you see in this clip here, I ran the drill backwards and I had absolutely no problems. I would also say just take it really slowly. You'll see I'm going extremely slowly here. Just slow and steady. I mean, you're not in any rush here. You don't want to ruin the top on your guitar. So yeah, running the drill backwards worked absolutely fine for me. This looks really quick, but it's sped up. I was actually going really slowly with it. And I wasn't biting away at any of the finish with anything. There was no wood chips, no paint chips. Thank God it was actually really, really clean and came out really nice. As you can see, they came out nice and clean. There's no chips or anything. And now we've actually got the correct diameter too, so it's going to take the CTS pots no problem. So here I just wanted to take one last pass with the drill bit. It's the same size bit, but I ran it forward this time, just to maybe give a mil or two of clearance either side. The pots were a little bit tight going in, so I just did this to give them a little bit of wiggle room, I guess. The instructions on the Home of Tone website suggest that you wire in the harness outside of the guitar cavity. So that's what I tried to do here. I was able to get so far, but some of the wires for the pickups were too short, so I ended up having to finish the job inside the cavity. When you are working outside the cavity like this, it is suggested to, like I have done here, put a cloth down over the finish. The last thing you want is some hot soldering iron or hot wires or hot pots to either burn or chip your finish as you're working. So here I'm after putting the harness into the guitar and I'm finishing off the wiring as best I can inside of the cavity. The main thing here I can say from my own experience is just to be so patient. If it's becoming too much and if you're getting frustrated, just come back to it, leave it for a while, take a breather and come back to it later. The worst thing you can do at this point is to try and burn yourself out. You could risk actually burning yourself, and you could risk really damaging your guitar. Here's where I ran into the second issue. When I plugged in the guitar, I couldn't get any signal. I've wired and experimented with enough guitar wiring to have made enough mistakes to know some basic issues. Things like swapping ground leads and live leads and getting ridiculous hum out of the guitar. This wasn't what happened. There was absolutely zero signal coming from the guitar whatsoever. The cable would make the noise on the way in and then just completely cut out to nothing. So I checked all my solder connections and they were all fine. There was no cold solders, there was no crossed wires before they got to where they were meant to go, no short circuits, things like that. Then I tried replacing the new jack for the original jack to see if that was the problem. Had I rewired the newer jack incorrectly, and no, that didn't work either. There was still just completely no signal, so obviously the issue was somewhere up the line in terms of the wiring harness. So this was when I contacted James from Home of Tone. Just so as everyone knows, I didn't suspect a problem from James's work anywhere. I knew that this was a mistake that I had made somewhere along the line, but my kind of logic and thinking was the best guy to help is probably the guy who designed the harness to go in. Surely he's had questions like this before. Maybe he's run into similar problems with other clients. Myself and James were messaging back and forth on Instagram for a little while. I sent him photos of the work that I had done, the soldering that I had done, the different color combinations of the wires and things like that. He confirmed that everything was in the right place and that it should be working fine. We came to the conclusion then that there was probably an issue with one of the wires that I was trying to reuse from the original harness. I was trying to reuse the switch and the switch harness wires coming from the switch down to the control cavity. What I think happened was, while I was removing the original wiring harness, I accidentally tugged on a wire too much or creased it some way. And basically I broke a wire. Somewhere along the line I must have broken a wire, therefore breaking the circuit, meaning that there was just absolutely zero signal coming out of the guitar. Now you have to remember, the original wires in this guitar were really thin. I doubt there was very much material inside of the plastic at all, so I was trying my hardest not to break any wires, but obviously they were thin and quite delicate, so easily happens. So if anybody with an older guitar or kind of a cheaper instrument, if you're planning on reusing any of the original wiring, definitely keep that in mind, that the wires could be too thin, they could break easily when you're removing old parts. Just keep that in mind when you are going through this. Don't run into this same incredibly frustrating mistake that I made. Luckily, I had a spare switch harness and switchcraft switch, so I just plugged those in place and everything was working properly then. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to show you an AV of the original guitar wiring and the new wiring with the new switch, the new jack, and the pre-wired control harness. I recorded a DI straight off of the output jack of the guitar both times, and I also recorded into the front of my Marshall JCM 2000, both clean and overdriven. Something you'll notice would be the clarity in the higher registers, the upper mid-range and the treble frequencies in this guitar. Now the guitar rings out much better, there's a lot more upper harmonics. Another thing is the overall functionality of the guitar. Now I can actually roll off the volume pots and get clean sounds from the guitar. Also in the middle position, blending the sounds between the two pickups is A, easier, and B, making the guitar way more versatile than it ever was. Rolling off the tone pots is far more musical sounding than it ever was before. It's less like a kind of a brick wall low pass filter, and it's more akin to bringing your heel back on a wah pedal. Other than that, thanks for watching.